Picture this. A guy making $52,000 a year walks into a dealership on a Saturday morning. He is not there to browse. He has done his research. He knows what he wants. He sits down, shakes hands, drinks the bad coffee, and 2 hours later, he is driving home in a $44,000 SUV. He feels incredible. He also just destroyed his financial future. And the worst part, nobody in that room told him to stop. In fact, every single person in that room was quietly thrilled for him. This video is about the number nobody at the dealership will ever give you, the real number, the honest answer to the question you actually need to ask before you step foot on a lot, before you open a car comparison app, before you even decide what color you want. How much car can you actually afford? Let us start with why this question is so hard to answer honestly. When you ask someone what they can afford, the instinct is to look at the monthly payment. That is how cars are sold. That is how dealers are trained. That is the number on every advertisement, every website, every finance office whiteboard. $499 a month. Low, right? Manageable. You spend more than that on food. But the monthly payment is a magic trick. It is designed to make a large number feel small by spreading it across time. When you look at a monthly payment, your brain is not calculating total cost. It is asking one question: can I survive this month if I add this bill? That is survival math, not wealth math. And the entire car industry is built on getting you to do survival math instead of wealth math. So, let us do wealth math. First, some context on where we actually are right now. The average new car transaction price in the United States recently crossed $48,000. That is not a luxury vehicle. That is the average. 10 years ago, that number was around $32,000. The price of the average new car has gone up roughly 50% in a decade. Meanwhile, median household income has grown by maybe 20 to 25% over that same period. That gap is not closing. It is widening. At the same time, the length of the average auto loan has stretched out dramatically. A 6-year loan used to be considered aggressive. Now, 7- and 8-year loans are common. Some lenders are offering 10. The industry solved the affordability crisis by making the debt last longer, not by making the cars cheaper. So the first uncomfortable truth is this: the car market has quietly repriced itself out of reach for a large portion of buyers, and the industry's response has been to extend financing terms until the monthly payment feels survivable again. You are not imagining it. Cars genuinely got harder to afford, and the system adapted not to help you, but to keep the transaction happening anyway. Now let us talk about the actual math. There's a rule that financial planners have used for decades. It's called the 20-10 rule. The idea is simple. Do not spend more than 20% of your annual take-home pay on a car purchase, and do not let your total monthly car payment exceed 10% of your monthly take-home pay. Simple, clean, almost never followed. Let's run some real numbers. If you make $50,000 a year, your take-home pay after taxes is probably somewhere around $40,000 to $42,000, depending on your state and deductions. 20% of that is $8,000 to $8,500. That is the car you can afford under the 20% rule. You can buy a reliable used car for $8,000. Not a new car, not a car with a warranty and heated seats and a touchscreen the size of a laptop, a car that gets you where you need to go without collapsing your balance sheet. Can you go slightly higher? Yes, that is why the 10% monthly rule exists as a soft ceiling. 10% of your monthly take-home on a $50,000 salary is roughly $330 to $350 per month. At current interest rates, that payment finances a car in the range of $14,000 to $18,000, depending on your term length and credit score. Still not $44,000. Let's step up the salary. $75,000 a year. Take home somewhere around $57,000 to $60,000. 20% of annual take home is about $12,000. The 10% monthly rule gives you around $500 per month, which finances a car somewhere between $22,000 and $26,000. You are starting to see the shape of things. $100,000 a year. Take home around 72 to 75,000. 20% of annual is 14 to 15,000. Monthly ceiling around $625, which finances roughly 28 to 33,000. This is the part where people push back. They say, I make $100,000 a year, I should be able to drive something decent. And they are right. A $30,000 car is decent. It is genuinely a good car. But the psychological expectation that a six-figure salary earns you a $50,000 vehicle is exactly how people at every income level end up car broke. Car broke, by the way, is a real phenomenon. It means you make a good income, your car is impressive, and you have almost no savings. Every month you are covering a large payment, high insurance on an expensive vehicle, and maintenance costs that scale with vehicle price. And at the end of the month, there's just enough left over to feel okay. You're not in crisis, you're just not building anything. Now here is where it gets more complicated, because the monthly payment is only part of the cost. When people calculate what they can afford on a car, they almost never include the full cost of ownership. They see the payment and they stop there. That is only the beginning. Let us break down what a car actually costs. Depreciation. A new car loses somewhere between 15 and 25% of its value in the first year alone. Buy a $45,000 car today, drive it for 12 months, and on paper you have lost somewhere between $6,700 and $11,000. You did not pay for that loss with your monthly payment. That loss happens silently, invisibly in the background. It is the single largest cost of owning a new vehicle, and most people never consciously feel it. Insurance. More expensive vehicle equals more expensive insurance. A $40,000 car costs meaningfully more to insure than a $20,000 car. Comprehensive and collision coverage scale with the vehicle's replacement value. Add in that newer, more expensive cars often have more expensive parts and more complex repair processes, and you're looking at a premium that compounds over time. For a young driver or someone in an urban area, this difference can be $3,000 to $5,000 per year. Maintenance and repairs. This one is subtle. Newer, technology-heavy vehicles often have lower day-to-day maintenance costs, but dramatically higher repair costs when something goes wrong. Replacing a sensor, a module, or a component in a modern luxury-adjacent vehicle can cost 2 to 3 times what the same repair would cost in a simpler vehicle. And the more features a car has, the more surface area for something to eventually fail. Interest. This is the one people are most willing to ignore because it feels abstract. But on a $45,000 car financed at 7% over 6 years, you'll pay roughly $10,700 in interest alone. You bought a $45,000 car for $55,700. Nobody advertises that number. Nobody frames the offer that way. But that is the transaction. When you add all of this up, the true annual cost of owning a $45,000 car is frequently between $10,000 and $15,000 per year, not the payment, the total cost. On a $50,000 salary, that's 20 to 30% of your gross income. On gross income, before taxes. Let us talk about what this actually costs you long term, because this is the part that should make you set down your phone and stare at the ceiling for a moment. Every dollar you spend on a car is a dollar not invested. That sounds obvious, but let us feel it with numbers. Suppose you are 30 years old. You have a choice. You can buy a car that costs you $800 a month all in, or you can make different choices that cost you $400 a month all in. That is a $400 per month difference. Suppose you invest that difference every month from age 30 to 65, 35 years, at an average annual return of 7%. That is $1.1 million. A car decision, one car decision, compounded over a working lifetime, $1 million. That is not a hypothetical scare tactic. That is compound interest doing what compound interest does. And the people who end up financially independent by 60 are almost always the people who figured this out in their 30s and made cold, unsentimental decisions about cars. Now, here is where the psychology comes in, because knowing all of this does not automatically change behavior. If it did, the average transaction price would not be $48,000. There's a concept called social comparison. We calibrate what feels normal based on what we see around us. If your neighbors drive $40,000 cars, a $40,000 car feels reasonable. If your coworkers drive $35,000 cars, a $40,000 car feels slightly aspirational, but not crazy. The car industry understood this before behavioral economists named it. That's why manufacturers constantly roll out new trim levels, why base models are deliberately stripped of features to make mid-level trims feel necessary, why the monthly payment is always advertised for the better-equipped model. You are not just buying transportation, you are buying your place in a visual social hierarchy, and that purchase is being optimized for by some of the sharpest marketers on the planet. The people who built the financing structures, the lease terms, the trim ladders, the showroom layouts, the coffee and the handshakes, they are not on your side. They are not bad people, they're just aligned with a different outcome than yours. So what is the practical framework? Here is a cleaner version of the rule, one that accounts for where car prices actually are right now. Take your annual gross salary divided by 10. That is the most you should spend on a vehicle, not your take-home, gross. On $50,000 a year, that's $5,000. Yes, $5,000, used car territory. On $75,000, that's $7,500. On $100,000, $10,000. On $150,000, $15,000. These numbers feel low. They are supposed to, because the default assumption most people carry around in their head, the number that feels normal, has been set by an industry whose job is to get you to spend more than you should. Can you bend this rule? Sure, life is not a spreadsheet. You have a long commute, you have kids, you live in a place with brutal winters, you need reliability. Valid. Go to the 15% version of the rule if you must, but don't pretend 20, 25, or 30% is a reasonable allocation of your income to a depreciating machine. And if you are going to spend more, pay cash, or get as close to cash as possible. Short-term loan, significant down payment, no gap insurance sold to you at the last second in the finance office. If you cannot do those things, you probably cannot afford that car. The uncomfortable conclusion is this. Most people in America are driving cars they cannot actually afford. Not technically cannot afford because the payment is being made, but strategically cannot afford, in the sense that the decision is costing them something they are not consciously tracking. It is costing them the ability to retire with dignity. It is costing them the ability to absorb an unexpected financial shock without going into credit card debt. It is costing them, quietly and slowly, the compounding returns on capital they are not investing. The car is in the driveway, it is paid for technically every month, and it is absolutely, silently dismantling what their financial future could have been. The dealership will always find a way to make the number feel manageable. That's the job. The monthly payment exists so that you don't do the math. Do the math. Here is the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely do not know the answer. At what point does a society's relationship with car culture become self-reinforcing poverty? When the vehicle you drive signals your status, when your status signals your value, when your value is determined by things you can't really afford, and when the entire system profits from keeping you in that loop indefinitely, is the problem financial literacy? Or is the problem something deeper about how we've decided to measure worth? Because no rule, no percentage, no framework fixes that. That one is on you.